Good evening, board members and residents. I'd like to call to order our regular board meeting for Monday, November 28th. I'd ask that everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Witt, will you please take the roll call?
Yes, Mr. Batkins. Here. Mr. Brado.
Here.
Mr. Olgiati. Here. Mrs. Rose.
Here.
Mr. Tominello.
Here.
Mr. Witt. Here. Mr. Verkust.
Here. Thank you. Next on our agenda is the approval of the consent agenda, which includes approval of the regular board meeting minutes of November 14th, 2022, approval of the bills in the amount of $1,112,941.77, approval of the October 2022 revenue and expenditure report, approval of the 2023 meeting calendar, and approval of a check for the Senior Center Christmas party. We weren't able to include that in the regular run, but again, we wanted to make sure that when the caterer showed up, we could have a check for them. So if there's no revisions, I'd be looking for a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
So moved. Support.
Motion by Mr. Badkins with support by Mr. Tominello. Any discussion? Hearing none and seeing no public comment, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. Thank you. Next on our agenda is approval of the regular agenda. Board members, I'd be looking for approval with the one addition. Item G3, approval of a dock and hoist on North River Road. So if there's no other changes, I'd be looking for a motion to approve the regular agenda with the addition of item G3.
I'll make that motion.
All right, is there support?
Support.
Oh, I think I heard Mr. Brado.
That's fine.
All right, any discussion on the motion? Hearing none and seeing no public comment, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. Thank you, board. Next, announcements. The annual Harrison Township Christmas tree lighting will be this Thursday, December 1st, from 6 until 8 p.m. Right here at Rosso Hall. Join the Parks and Rec Committee for cookies, cocoa, and photos with a special guest. The committee is collecting non-perishable food items on this night, so for those who might plan to attend, if you want to help out the less fortunate in our community, you might bring a non-perishable food item. Our Harrison Township firefighters are accepting donations for their virtual giving tree. They are helping over a dozen Harrison Township families this season. I encourage you to visit their Facebook page, Harrison Township Firefighters Local 1737. Sometimes if you just do a search for that number, 1737, usually it'll pop up. And there you'll find more information and details on how to donate. The library is hosting their annual cookie walk this Saturday, December 3rd, from noon till 3 p.m. Volunteers bake a variety of delicious cookies that will be available for sale. The donations fund programs such as the annual Shred Day. On Friday, December 9th, kids can stop by the library throughout the day to make a fun Christmas ornament. Instructions and supplies will be provided by the library. For more information on these and other great community events, visit the library's website, htlibrary.org. You can call 586-329-1261 or email them librarian@htlibrary.org. The Harrison Township Senior Center hosts a monthly casino trip on the last Friday of every month. Space is limited for these trips, so please call for details and registration. The Senior Center also features chair yoga on Tuesdays and Fridays at 1 p.m. for seniors to increase their strength and flexibility, as well as an aerobics strength class on Mondays at 1 p.m. and Fridays at 9:30 a.m. The Senior Center also hosts bingo every Wednesday at noon, euchre every Thursday at noon. And the Senior Center also takes many field trips throughout the year. For more information on times and events, please call our coordinator, Jen, 586-466-1497. And for more information on all of these, as well as any other township events, you can always call the supervisor's office, 586-466-1445. Visit our website, www.harrison-township.org, or follow us on Twitter at Harrison TWP MI. Are there any other announcements?
Yes, Mr. Supervisor, if I can, just an announcement that winter tax bills will be mailed on December 1st. The bills will also be available on our website December 1st, so if you'd like to pay for it, your taxes, before you get the physical bill in the mail, you're welcome to do so.
All right, good. Any other announcements? Okay, hearing none, we'll move forward. Our next agenda item is item D1, a resolution. Board members, our township engineer has brought to us a potential grant opportunity to improve the Vanter-de-Buff drain that runs from Metro Parkway to Jefferson. This runs right through the 160-acre wooded wetlands that we own. The drain handles stormwater for over 700 acres in the center of the township, and it is in need of dredging. This grant would be able to fund the clean-out of the drain, as well as some additional detention and habitat restoration. It could also be used to help control the spread of Phragmites in the drain. The grant requires a minimum of 20% match, so attached is a resolution in support of this grant application. The cost is, to apply for the grant, is not to exceed $3,000. I recommend the adoption of this resolution and the approval of up to $3,000 for the grant application.
Make a motion to adopt the resolution and approval up to $3,000 for the grant application.
All right, motion by Mr. Witt, is there support?
Support.
Support by Mr. Brado. Yeah, this is really a cool opportunity. When you read the grant, I guess the information that supports the grant and encourages you to apply, this really
It's written
ticks,
for us.
yeah, it seems like it ticks a lot of boxes, and so we've been working on getting letters of support and drafting the narrative to apply for the grant. It's due Wednesday, so this is very timely. Any discussion? Hearing none and seeing no public comment, Mr. Witt, will you please take the roll call?
Mr. Witt, yes. Mr. Brado?
Yes.
Mr. Batkins?
Yes.
Mr. Olgiati?
Yes.
Mrs. Rose?
Yes.
Mr. Tominelli?
Yes.
Mr. Verkowski?
Yes. Thank you. Next on our agenda, item E1 is an appointment. Board members, Mr. Bruce Meek was appointed to the Downtown Development Authority Board at the very beginning of the formation of the DDA. I tried to look for where it was. I couldn't even go back far enough in the records to find when he came on board. He served our community very well, but he recently has asked to resign. He is in the process of selling some of his business interests in the DDA, and the new owner, the person purchasing his business interest, has applied for Mr. Meek's vacant position in our DDA. His application is in the board packet. I recommend accepting the resignation of Mr. Bruce Meek from the DDA and appointing Mr. George Kassar to the DDA board for the remainder of a term to expire March 18, 2025.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
On his application, he's listing his address as Grosse Pointe, Michigan, and then it says township resident for less than a year.
Mhm.
So is he moving here, or
You know-
just his business is here?
Yep, so in order to serve on the DDA, so the short answer is I don't know. He is in the audience, so he may be planning to move here, and that I didn't know. But in order to serve on the DDA, you either have to live, there's a certain quantity of members who either have to live in the district or have business interests in the district. So his residency isn't required, but as to whether he is a resident or not, I don't know. So.
So he would fall under the bucket of businesses in.
Correct. So some members can be, for like the rules dictate that the supervisor has to be a member of the DDA board. The rules say that some members can be, I don't know if they use the term at large, but basically
Members of the
residents.
general public.
Right. But a certain quantity of them must either live or work in the district. So he would certainly satisfy that requirement as having employment, his owning a business in the district. Any other discussion, or is there a motion?
I'll make that motion to accept George Kassar to the appointment to the Downtown Development Authority Board, replacing Mr. Bruce Meeks. We appreciate your service, Bruce. All these years, you've done a great job on that, and people think very highly of you, and I'm sure George will do just as well. Thank you.
All right, well, there's a motion. Is there support?
Support.
Support from Mr. Batkins. Any discussion? Hearing none and seeing no public comment, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. Next on our agenda, item F1 from the clerk's office.
So somewhat related, we have received a request from the Cassar Restaurant Group to transfer ownership of their 2022 Class C SDM license and Sunday sales permit, AM and PM entertainment permit, outdoor service, one area from Jefferson Street Pub to their new the Cassar Restaurant Group. We have received all the appropriate paperwork. Building department's gone through and done all their inspections and everything, so we're recommending that the board approve the transfer of ownership.
I just have one question. I just was reading through it, and I just wanted clarity. It says, and I don't see a lot of problems with it. It says a new dance permit and a new Sunday sales permit PM, but not a Sunday sales permit AM. What is, I guess I've never seen that when I see a liquor license being transferred. I typically transfer over the
That's,
entire old liquor license, but I don't see a Sunday sales AM.
you know, we cut and paste based on what liquor control sent over to us, so I don't, if there's some clarification that we have to do with liquor control, we'll work with the applicant to make sure it's there.
I just haven't seen it worded like that before, and that's why that maybe Mr. Huth can give us some clarity on that, because I'm sure he's dealt with these before in the past.
I wish I could, Mr. Hogan. I agree that I've just seen it come to the local municipalities as it's been approved in Lansing, so I can't help you on that.
I don't have an issue with the transfer of the liquor license. I think it'll be good for the community. It's just, I want to make sure from a legal standpoint that there's not any problems with the wording on this, that's all.
Yeah, and I just pulled up the license from, you know, the application from the state and confirmed that what we have matches what was applied for at the state level.
Well, the AM and the PM sales permits are additional, right? So that would be like approving the permit plus the AM Sunday.
Yeah,
AM,
if I
PM
had to
Sunday.
guess, they look at the Class C as a base license and everything else is added on to it. So
Right.
it's that's probably why they're calling it new.
So it seems inclusive. I mean, basically, it's covering, you know,
Okay.
like, it would include everything, so.
To the
Any-
best of my knowledge, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
There's nothing that we asked for. I don't know what the dance permit is.
I think it's so you can have live bands and have music at the same time is all a dance permit is, because otherwise it runs into weird old laws about, you know, impropriety, and you might see a woman's ankle or something.
Well, I think originally that liquor license had a cabaret license attached to it, if I'm not mistaken, didn't it, Bruce? Years ago?
Years ago.
Yeah.
Not under my law.
Right, no, I'm just, I mean, that's just one of those kind of like Harrison Township facts that
Yeah,
had a
that's
cabaret
awesome.
license that was.
Interesting, very interesting. Maybe we should table this for further discussion. No, all right. Let's see.
Make a motion to adopt the resolution in support of, recommend approval of the liquor license transfer as presented.
I'll support that.
All right, we got a motion by Mr. Witt with support by Mr. Olgiati. So we had some discussion. Is there further discussion? Hearing none and seeing no public comment, Mr. Witt, will you please take is that a roll call?
Yes, sir. Mr. Witt, yes. Mr. Olgiati?
Yes.
Mr. Backens?
Yes.
Mr. Brado?
Yes.
Mrs. Rose?
Yes,
Mr. Tominelli?
Yes.
Mr. Burkowski?
Yes. Thank you, Board. Next, down on page 77 of your board packet, item G1, our deputy supervisor was successful in his run for a seat in the Michigan State House of Representatives. As a result, he will be resigning his position at the end of this year. Incoming lawmakers begin January 1st. I am currently interviewing candidates for deputy supervisor, but I do not have a name to bring forward at this time. My concern is that if I select a deputy, extend the offer to them, and they want to give 2 weeks' notice, I want to be able to kind of begin that process and get a training. So I'd like to request up to 2 weeks of overlap in order for the incoming deputy to train with the outgoing deputy. And this is not unique. We've done this in the past, both in my office as well as in your office for the last appointment. I will appoint a deputy in December, and I will present a name to the board at the next meeting for concurrence. The ultimate cost is really paying wages to an individual for up to 2 weeks. So at their current rate, that would be a cost of $2,264.65.
I'll make that motion to approve up to a 2-week overlap for the position of deputy supervisor to allow for training.
Support.
Got a motion by Mrs. Rose with support by Mr. Tominello. I appreciate that support, just kind of keep things moving smooth. Any discussion?
Are you planning on having, so if I'm looking at the calendar right, the 26th, probably the 23rd is the last day? So you have, for 2 weeks overlap, that has to start on the 12th?
Yeah, and it may not be a total of 2 weeks. It really.
Up to 2 weeks? Is that
Yeah, that's what
okay.
I'm looking for, and that, you know, and that's really a function of, I mean, these are salaried positions, but it's really a function of, you know, someone may say, listen, I gave a notice to my employer, but I have Friday off, and I can come in this Friday. I mean, it's really, until I know who that person is. This time of the year, you've got folks who may have been working for an elected person who wasn't elected, so it's kind of like musical chairs. You can't start this search in October because somebody thinks, hey, I've got a job already, and then on October 8th, they found out soon they won't have a job. So it's really a kind of a transitional period. I really didn't look that closely at the calendar. You know, I don't know when the first falls, and Joe may not even be in session until the 3rd or the 4th or something
The
like
second
that.
is a Monday, so probably the 3rd, you're right.
Right, so I
Probably-
mean, he could even say, hey, I'll come in on that day and cross-train or something like that. I don't
Just,
know.
I'm sure there's a lot to hand over, you know, he does a lot.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And I don't remember any of it from when I did it by myself, so. And it is important to note, because it has been brought to my attention, this board may recall that within the past year or two, I don't remember the exact date, maybe, I think it's a little more than a year, we did approve, I think, a $1,200 kind of a scholarship, and the requirements of that scholarship were if he didn't serve 2 years, or if he left employment voluntarily, or during that 2-year period, he'd have to repay half of that. So that is a part of, you know, his separation. Good word, thank you. So I'm aware of it, and I know that some folks brought it up, so it certainly doesn't hurt to say it publicly so that folks are aware that we're aware that that's what we agreed to, and that's what we'll do. Any other discussion? Hearing none and seeing no public comment, we have a motion by Mrs. Rose with support by Mr. Tominello. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. Thank you, Board. Next on our agenda, a discussion regarding sewers in the center of the township. Board members, as you know, we have been in pursuit of grants for the construction of sewers in the center of the township. I didn't note this, but we're talking roughly from Lance Cruz Town Hall over to Hazel, and from Metro Parkway to South River Road. There's some exceptions, but that's the general neighborhood. We were successful in getting a $1 million federal earmark grant with a 20% match, thanks to the efforts of Congresswoman Lisa McLean. We were also successful in getting an SRF loan, State Revolving Fund loan, for $8.5 million with a 10% principal forgiveness. The first step in this entire project would involve engineering, then construction of larger infrastructure, followed by local street-by-street sewers, and then finally connections. Our preliminary estimate for engineering is in the high six figures. We've estimated construction at $8.5 million, and a common rule of thumb at this level, at this preliminary level, is roughly 10% engineering versus construction. Oftentimes, a figure of 10% is used. For this reason, I believe we should solicit bids for this work. We're talking about bidding, you know, $700,000 to $900,000 worth of work. I've asked our engineer, Dame Newmer, to provide a proposal to prepare bid documents for the engineering. I asked that the engineering would include, the obvious is the design of the system, but also a cost analysis, as well as potential revenue, which could be used to pay a bond that offsets construction costs. I'd ask that the project be engineered so that it could be built in sections based on resident interest, maybe as local as street by street. And I'd also ask that the proposal acknowledges that we will look at both price as well as qualifications when awarding the work. And I think to clarify, number one just says, how do we pay for this? I don't really, this isn't something that just rolls off the tip of your tongue. I mean, we can bond for sewers over a long period of time. And when we do look at bonding, we can look at sometimes some relatively low interest rates. Low interest rates spread out over, decades could mean that we could cover the cost or a portion of the cost ourselves. Obviously, it's way too preliminary to say that, but that's a possibility. So I would like to see that, how much revenue would this generate? I think Mr. Witt suggested maybe like if 20% of the people hooked up, or 30%, some kind of graduated thing to see what revenue we would see. Engineering it in sections gives us the opportunity. We know that there are folks in this neighborhood that want sewers. They come to us and they ask. We know from our meeting last year that there's definitely folks who came and spoke in opposition to sewers. So I don't know where they all live. I don't know who's on what street and who needs it more than another. Maybe elevations suggest that a particular street is lower, has more challenges with the soil percolation, and maybe they're more interested in moving forward. If we structure it in a way that we could do it in sections, we can kind of at least address those who do want it, and maybe, not necessarily move forward in other areas. And then third, and I think just to clarify, if we move forward with this process, and we get several bids, and, the bids are relatively close, I would certainly recommend Wade Trim. They're our township engineer, they're familiar with our system, so I don't think that this bidding process should be structured in a way that it's strictly monetary, right? So this board has that opportunity to say, well, we're gonna award this based on qualifications, based on numbers. I think it's both. I think if we're within the ballpark, I would probably recommend that the work go to Wade Trim. But I certainly wouldn't recommend that we spend, 10, 15, 20% more just to stay with Wade Trim. So I am asking for this bid spec to be constructed that way. So if we look at that $1 million grant plus a 20% match, we're talking a minimum of $1.2 million. The engineering, as well as some of the larger infrastructure, should be able to be paid for with the $1.2 million provided by the earmark. Once the engineering is completed, we can discuss financing, potentially incentives, other consideration. There's a consideration to say, even if we construct a brand-new sewer down a road, maybe one resident wants to hook up right away because they've got a failing system. Another resident may say, I just put in a brand-new system, had it engineered, and, it was given this many year lifespan. So there's a lot of those kinds of little details that really have to be addressed. Now, the reality is all of these are significant decisions. They should be carefully considered before proceeding with any construction. And again, probably in the term of this board, we haven't had a meeting as well attended as the meeting when we discussed this. So there's clearly some passion, and you want to give people an opportunity to offer input. For all of these reasons, I am recommending that we do not accept the state revolving fund loan at this time. If we move forward with that SRF program, we must commit to soliciting bids for construction by June of 2023 and award the work by the fall. I believe it's September of 2023. I do not believe we can accomplish all that is needed in that time frame. Until we have cost estimates, I cannot ask this board to consider participating in the costs, and I cannot ask any resident to even consider or agree to any SAD if there were to be one. The SRF loan comes with a low interest rate and a 10% grant, if you will. There is a cost because we have to go through a bonding process. It could also include certain bidding and wage restrictions. This is complete conjecture on my part, but I have had a window into some of the activities in Lansing because our deputy supervisor has been, in some of those meetings. Because we know that there will be, that the governor and the House and the Senate will all be democratically controlled. It's not unreasonable to think that they could reinstate certain bidding requirements that might require wage requirements, different things like that, prevailing wage things. And so I know that's a huge variable, but I mean, we could move forward with this and find that we've tied our hands. To me, the strongest and most powerful argument is this would be too fast. I can't just say by summer of next year we're plowing ahead. That's not what I heard from our residents, and I don't have a good enough feel on the cost. and on the level or percent of interest. Therefore, at this time, I recommend authorizing Wade Trim to prepare bid documents for the engineering of the sanitary sewers in the center of the township. I had correspondence, either over the weekend or early today from Mr. Newmer. He said as a part of the work that he's already done, he'd prepare that bid spec at no cost. So we're looking for authorizing them to prepare this bid spec with the proposals to be brought back before the board at a future date for consideration, as well as to authorize the supervisor to notify Eagle that we will not participate in the SRF program at this time. So there's a lot of information there. Could be discussion, questions, so there's a motion or questions or discussion.
So did you say Wade Trim was going to prepare bid documents for free?
That's correct.
That's what I heard?
Yeah, yep, and I just got that notification. You know, I'll be frank about this subject. This whole process is, I would not have been comfortable today coming to you saying, I would like authorization to kick Wade Trim off on an $800,000 engineering project. I think that's just way too substantial of a project, and I'm not saying it's 800,000, but whatever, plus or minus. So it stands to reason that we're gonna go to bid, and I think it bodes us well. There are engineering firms that would like to have our work, and obviously, Mr. Newmer and his firm would probably like to, perform well. So however we go about this process, we're kind of in a position where, this doesn't mean that we're changing engineering firms, but this is certainly a chance to say, okay, well, how does your bid stack up against someone else's? So I was a little surprised, but as I thought about it, maybe not that surprised. They've been working on this system. We've paid Wade Trim over a period of time to not only do some preliminary work, but ultimately that engineering project that we did, that we approved, that made us eligible for both of these grants. I want to say that was in the $50,000 range. So I think he sees this as a part of that outcropping of that original work, scope of work.
So, we're gonna turn down the grant now. Is there any likelihood that we can get this SRF loan later?
That's a great question. I'm glad you brought that up. The short answer is nobody could say with certainty. I think a more nuanced answer is we applied in '21, we received approval for the revolving funds with no principal forgiveness. We applied again, and in '22, we were approved for the loan with 10% principal forgiveness. So, I mean, I suppose if I were that person on that committee deciding on that grant, and we applied in 2023, I don't know how good our chances are when you say, listen, these people keep coming back. Now, we can give them an explanation that our timeline just doesn't fit. So the short answer to that is maybe, I think. A longer answer, you might recall that the very reason we moved forward with some of this was because Mr. Newmer had some understanding through his firm and contacts and things that this loan forgiveness or principal forgiveness may be on the horizon. He's indicated to me that, again, based on the current climate in Lansing and the future climate, that there's an indication that any future SRF program under this current project or scope is probably going to have a weighted score based on, I guess, socioeconomic factors. In other words, if we apply and an identical community applies and the median income in their neighborhood is lower than ours, they would score better. So, again, that's just a guess. The other thing, though, we don't know is what other grants could be available. I mean, this isn't the last grant, the only grant. When we prepared that engineering study, it was to apply for the SRF program. Little did we realize that we were able to use that engineering study to apply for $1 million grant with a 20% match. That's way better than 10% loan forgiveness. So I think the longer answer is there's very likely some opportunities in the future. And certainly once we have something engineered, we've got some momentum from one grant, the hope would be to parlay that into a future grant.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion, or is there a motion?
accept the $0 wage trim cost to prepare bid documents for the engineering of the sanitary sewer and authorize the supervisor to notify Eagle our denial, well, our declining of the SRF loan at this time.
Okay. Got a motion by Mr. Badkins. Is there support?
I'll support that motion.
Okay. We had a fair amount of discussion. Is there further discussion?
I would just, timing on it, and if we could review that, because that's gonna be a big package.
Oh, for sure.
So, like to review that before it goes
Yeah,
out
yeah.
through the, bidding system.
Yeah, and I think your professional perspective helps, right? Because, you know, the guy who's preparing the bid spec prepared them before, but the guy who's looking at them and bidding on them sees that as something different. So I'd absolutely welcome you to be a part of that before that goes out.
Okay. Did they give you any timing though, just,
He didn't, when we talked about this, I think that.
first of the year, or it's not this year, right?
I don't think it would be out for bid this year. It would be early next year.
I'm saying the bid document. be
Right.
prepared by-
So,
okay.
so to paraphrase, when we were talking about all these different options, our perception was that we wouldn't even be in a position to bring back a recommendation to this board until maybe March, early March perhaps. I mean, as a general timeline, which is why we said, well, there's no way we're gonna do all that work. Just the field work, the surveying work, Mr. Newmer had indicated that could be 6 figures just to kind of shoot elevations and look at different conditions in the field. So there's a lot of work to be done, so this isn't something that's gonna happen real fast. But, it's the first step, and I certainly would not wanna sit here and say we lost $1 million grant. Right, so, gotta move forward. This seems to be the most measured way to do that without, forcing anything.
At some point, may not be anytime soon, this information's gonna be valuable for the residents when this has to happen.
Right, and that's what I
Eventually,
said.
it's going to happen.
Yeah, it's
so.
not a matter of if.
Right.
There'll be a point where I think through state law, we would be mandated. And we're seeing that. Again, it happens. It happens at different rates and, but having engineering prepared, the engineering's not going stale. Right? There's nothing about gravity-fed sewers that we anticipate changing anytime in the future. So I agree. I think, having the engineering's a no-brainer, getting some of the larger infrastructure. Understand that there's a significant sanitary main that runs right down Coleridge. So if you're near Coleridge, it's real easy to connect. So if we recognize that, say, for example, if I recall, there's a need for also a significant kind of for lack of a better word, a trunk line or large main along Tucker. There might be someone who says, hey, that's great, I can hook up right away. But it's necessary to do some of the local, more regional stuff. So I think this is gonna result in the engineering and some of these larger trunk lines, larger infrastructure that we can get done. And then that'll open the window for local streets, local areas to connect. So it's kind of a measured approach.
Yep.
Any other discussion? Hearing none, we'll open the floor for public comment.
C. William Bardell, 26-year resident, clean-cut, do-gooder boy next door, 50-year skilled tradesman. I just find it interesting that this has got to be political. When most prevailing wage jobs, and Mr. Batkins knows, is time and material, and most of the time, those jobs get done cheaper with less headaches than the non-union. So, because the Democrats, for some reason, they're the boogeyman and they got the House and they got all 3 branches in Michigan, somehow are going to come back and bite you. You want, for your trade, you want to make what you're supposed to make, and what's wrong with the skilled tradespeople making their prevailing wage that are going to do you a job? It's mostly time and material, and they're professionals. So I don't know if you're afraid of the boogeyman. Are the Democrats the boogeyman somehow? Okay? I thought the craziness stuff went out in 2020 or 2016, all the crazy stuff. Okay? The voters voted, we don't want crazy stuff no more. We want normal. So, it's not that, it's just that you're not ready. So why are you making it political, that the Democrats are the boogeymen all of a sudden? You respect skilled labor, you pay prevailing wage. Respect the craft. It takes years and years and years to learn this stuff. Doesn't take overnight. It takes 10 years minimum to get good at any trade. You can ask Mr. Batkins. 5-year apprenticeship, and 5 years after that to know what the heck you're doing. Okay? So, I don't know, you're not ready. You just tell them that you're not ready, you don't know, have your everything together yet. It's not about the Democrats and the House, they gotta pay prevailing wage, because you better thank God they do pay prevailing wage, because you're gonna get better people. Okay? Less headaches. So quit union bashing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Also going, Jim Fain, 38014 Chartier. Are we under the gun right now? I guess, I know you can't answer any questions. So I guess I have a couple questions. One, is the state of Michigan pressing us to get this done? Number one. If they're not pressing us, even though there's grants for things, sometimes I feel like it's like today, Cyber Monday, right? Everything's on sale. You don't have to buy it because it's on sale. If you don't need it, don't buy it. So I guess what I'm saying is, I feel like we're doing this because we hear the word grant and we want to reach out and we don't want to lose that free money, but it's never going to be free for the residents. I'm on a septic. I just did tonight, I took my water bill. And I think the most important thing that everybody needs to understand that has a septic is that your bill is going to go up 275%. Exactly 275%. So right now, I'm paying $3.41 for water. You're going to pay $7.48 for sewage and another $1.82 for the interceptor. That's another $9.30 per unit. So if you got a couple $100 water bill, it went from $200 to $750 a quarter. I think that you could get a lot of work done on your septic and your tank and cleaning and anything you need to do. If there's a resident that's got a little bit of a offshoot septic system that needs a little bit of work, you can get a lot of work done. Just cleaning it, it's a couple $100, $300. You can get your tank cleaned out. So I just think that everybody needs to look at the big picture, because if you're talking $900 to $1,000 a quest, that's a $4,000 a year water bill. That's crazy. I mean, that's crazy. And I know there's a deal where it says that the township will allow you to have 2 meters if you want outside spigots and sprinklers and you want to do all that. I'm a construction guy. I know what it would take to run water lines to separate my system in my house to make my domestic water work for my kitchen and my bathtub, and then separate into another whole system that would work for my outside spigots and my sprinkler system. It wouldn't be just as easy as paying a township to come and hook up a meter. You'd have to have a plumber come in and reroute everything. So I think that there's a little bit of education that needs to happen here for all the residents. And I think they need to understand how much this is going to impact them down the road. This is going to be a huge impact. So I'm just curious if they got a gun to our head telling us that we have to do this, or is this something that we just feel like we want to do? That is, I guess, my concern.
Thank you. Seeing no other public comment, we'll close the floor and move back to board comment. I'll do my best to try to answer some of the questions. First, the initial resident, I apologize if it seemed as if I was bashing. As the resident said, and as I stated, our primary reason is because the timeline associated with the SRF loan simply doesn't match with the timeline that we probably need to follow. I merely pointed out when we were discussing about the potential, are there other grants, are there strings attached? This grant could have some certain strings attached. I don't know what those are, I don't know what that will look like, because it hasn't happened yet. But it is possible that that grant in 6 months from now may not look as attractive as it is today. That's just merely a consideration. But as I stated, the primary reason is simply because I don't believe we could move forward on an $8.5 million project by the middle of next year. So I apologize if that came off as bashing anybody. That was not my intention. Other resident asked, is the state pressing us? Short answer, no. There's no mandate coming from the state of Michigan. We've not been approached by an agency saying that there's a problem in the center of the township. We do know there are properties that are a significant problem in the center of the township. That doesn't mean that if resident A has a functioning system that they should be somehow punished because resident B hasn't rebuilt their septic field. But the reality is we do know that there are challenges. This winter, I encourage anyone to drive through that neighborhood on a nice cold day. You're gonna see some green grass and ditches full of water, and that ain't from sump pumps. It's a fact. But will the state someday mandate that we do this? Yes. They've done this in other communities. It's usually based on water quality. I recognize the concerns with the billing. I get that, and I understand that. I don't know that I agree with the percentages, but I don't disagree with the notion that having sewer service comes at a cost. Having a septic field comes at a cost. You do have to clean them out from time to time. They do have to be rebuilt from time to time. Some areas, they last longer than others, but they're, on a regular basis, we're approached by people in that neighborhood saying, I've got this failing system, when are sewers coming in? At the time of sale, sometimes it's an issue that comes up. Suffice it to say that there will come a time when we do have to move forward with those sewers. I can't tell you what that is, and I maintain the statement I made back in 2021. The best time to put sewers in the center of the township is when we can get the most grant money, and we're as close as we were to being forced by the state to do so. That way, we're given that opportunity as long as possible. You'd mentioned, we don't want to lose the grant. We're operating under the assumption that eventually we will need to construct sewers in the center of that township. I am comfortable making that statement. If we get a grant and we can use that grant to engineer the sewers, that just saved everybody $1.2 million. That's number one. Number two, if we can do it in a way that individual streets can connect, if a majority of the people on that street want the system, who am I to tell them they can't hook up? So we're trying to do this in as gradual and as measured of an approach as possible, trying to get as much outside money as we can to pay for it. And if we have the engineering in place and we have the major infrastructure and no street can get a majority of people want to hook up, maybe it's something we have to wait on. That part we don't control. But if I can get $1 million to pay for that engineering, knowing that that engineering won't go stale, I'm gonna do that. So I 100% agree. We do not want to lose that grant. It would be foolish for us not to get that level of what is that, 70-some percent of the cost paid for, 80-some percent, 83% of the cost paid for through federal dollars. Again, I might not agree with the 275%, but I do recognize that the cost of having sewers does come with a service fee. It also comes with no cost for septic. It also comes with a lot of other issues. We're not here to debate that right now. We're really looking at saying, how can we move forward? If some residents want it, some don't. Let's put the pieces in place and let those residents decide on a local basis what they want to do. As I said, there's a lot of considerations. Even if there were sewers on the street, when do you have to hook up? What's a reasonable time frame to require people to connect? If you've got a failing system, it would seem obvious you'd want to connect. If you've got a brand new system, you might want some time to be able to amortize the cost that went into that system. So there's a lot of those variables we need to consider. So this seems to be the more measured, gradual approach, that we're not ignoring the problem. God forbid there is an issue at the state. I'd rather be in a position where we had the engineering in place and we're not facing fines. One of our employees owns a cottage in a rural community where the state sued that community, required them to hook up, and the overall cost to install that system was substantially more than what they would have paid had they gone through a normal process and it wasn't through a consent judgment forced by the state and with the state's involvement. And they were fined for not solving that problem or being proactive. So this is kind of that fine balance. It would be a shame for us to get sued and other residents end up having to pay a fine that we incurred because we didn't act. So this is our best way to be measured with that process while still not requiring that connection. Ignoring the problem seems irresponsible. And that's just my comments. Any other board comments? Hearing none, we've got a motion by Mr. Badkins with support by Mr. Olgiati. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Thank you, board. Next on our agenda, item G3, a dock and hoist approval. Board members, I did bring forward to you a request to add this agenda item. The residents at 32649 North River have been in the process. I believe the Eagle permits go back to 2021, the applications, July. At this point, they came in, wanted to do the work, had a contractor that was prepared to do the work. It's a local contractor in our township, but they needed this additional approval. This certainly isn't an emergency, but out of respect for the resident as well as the contractor, I've asked to add it because in my 14 years on this board, we've never denied one of these requests. We do have a letter of recommendation from the engineer, and tonight's, if we can't approve this tonight, it would allow the resident and the contractor to get moving, hopefully in this construction season, and put them ahead for next year. So at this time, I would recommend that we approve the construction of a 4-foot by 30-foot dock with a 15 by 15 boat hoist at 32649 North River Road.
So moved.
All right, is there support?
Support.
Support by Mr. Brado? Okay. Got a motion by Mr. Tominello, a support by Mr. Brado. Any discussion, board members?
We're not, with ice about days away, depending on the weather, I mean, it looks like we got some time, you know. We're not gonna trap equipment in there that people get to look at out the back of their house.
Well, and there's permits associated with that, and all this comes down to is if this extends into bottomlands, we have an ordinance that says it's gotta come before us before we approve it. And again, that ordinance was kind of reactionary to maybe some large construction that occurred. This isn't the kind of construction that's gonna block flow. As to whether they can do it this year, who knows? Maybe the fella says, listen, I got 4 pilings I gotta do from the lake, get my barge out of there, and I can do the rest of it from the shore. I don't know that. It was brought to me through our building official that the applicant asked if it could be moved forward because it was time sensitive to them.
And you're concerned, Brian, that could happen to a permit that we approve in June, and the contractor does, you know what I mean, like when
I
we
just didn't
approve
know
it, isn't it?
what that permit entailed as far as leaving equipment
Yeah,
behind someone's house.
that's
for
all,
winter.
that's all state and federal. So, right, the Army Corps, and they kind of have those rules about what you can and can't do in the lake. Our real purview here is, do we believe this is gonna be detrimental or abnormal? We've approved 30-foot docks, boat hoists pretty regular. So, as to whether or not they're gonna, destroy fish habitat, that's Eagle. Or cause, temporary issues associated with construction.
Okay.
All right. Any other discussion? Hearing none and seeing no public comment, we have a motion by Mr. Tominello with support by Mr. Brado. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Thank you, board. Next is public comments. We'll open up the floor for public comments. They can be about any subject that you wish. We ask that you try to limit those comments to 5 minutes in length. And we ask that, I'm sorry, okay. You can, I thought we asked you to go to the podium. Sure.
This is in regards to a issue that I think most of you are familiar with, my wall structure.
Joe, if you just wanna hand him, pass me down, and then you can get to the podium so people can hear you.
regarding the wall that my neighbor has constructed. Just, again, I think most of you are familiar with this. I'll just make a real brief history. Back in the summer of 2021, this wall was constructed. I objected to it just because of the appearance of it and the fact that I felt it was a violation of several ordinances. I went and discussed it with the building people, whatever the proper term for them is, the inspectors. They basically, their attitude was, well, what's the big deal? Don't worry about it. They weren't going to do anything about it. I discussed it with Mr. Verkest. I made my presentation to you folks, and even though I think most of you were sympathetic to the fact that it shouldn't be there, you stated, and I think correctly, that you really didn't have any authority to do anything about it. So I went to the zoning board, presented to them. Mr. Carbon, the neighbor who built the wall, wasn't there, but he was represented by an attorney. And the board voted unanimously that the wall was constructed without permit, was improper, shouldn't be there. So time went along. This was January 11th. So time went along, and I hadn't heard anything. So a couple weeks ago, I went up to the building department and asked for an update on what was going on with this. And Brad, I'm sorry, I don't recall Brad's last name.
Mr. Condon?
Okay, told me he was not able to give me any information. So I filed a Freedom of Information Act with the clerk. They were very prompt in providing me with a good deal of information. One of those pieces being that there was to be a hearing on November 23rd, 8:30 a.m. in District Court 41B. So I'm not an attorney. I don't really know how these things work. So I was intended to go up there with the hope of being able to present as an interested party. I had my information together here. I had my letters from the township stating that it needed to be removed, tickets to the owners that it needed to be removed. I had several notices to appear, all of which appear to have been rescheduled for some reason. They were never actually happened. I had my photos, the whole thing. I had a letter of fiction from Mr. Carbon regarding issues on the wall that he presented to the township. And I realize this isn't real pertinent, but I had my $25 invoice from Mr. Carbon for, well, how do you put it, for a resident utilizing the concrete wall located there and proceeds to enjoy the lake viewing. So I got up to court at 8:30 in the morning, and I was advised by the clerk up there that the hearing had been dismissed due to the fact that the wall had been ruled in compliance. So if you look at those photos, those were taken this morning, you might ask, well, how was that incompliant? Doesn't look very compliant. So, simple. If you can't make the structure compliant with the ordinance, you make the ordinance compliant with the structure. And apparently what's happened is the building department, and I'm not aware of this being approved by anybody, has added a item to the bottom of the list of requirements for walls, and I'm sorry, I wore my wrong glasses, hopefully I'll get this right. Fences, walls, hedgerows, and protective barriers not greater than 2 feet in height are exempt from the non-obscuring requirement. So I'm kind of referring to this as the Robert Cardin Amendment because I'm sure that's probably the only person that applies to. So basically what they are saying is that you can put anything that you want within the first 2 feet. And I think it's also important to understand that my objection to this wall is not only that it's obscuring. I mean, I can see over it. That's not that big. It's just that it's ugly and it's unsightly. It looks like something out of a correctional institution. So anyways, the building department says as long as it's not over 2 feet, it's fine. So last Sunday, November 20th, about 10 o'clock at night, my neighbor has his contractor out there working at night, which again is in violations. It's not going to be should be doing construction after 8 p.m. He's got his little head with a headlight on it, and he's knocking this wall down so it's 24 feet high, or 24 inches, I'm sorry, 2 feet high. And sure enough, the next morning, which would be the 21st, the township building department is out there with their tape measures, measuring that to make sure it's not exceeding 24 inches. I think it was originally about 30. So that then, therefore, they could go and dismiss this hearing that was supposed to be held on the 23rd, and now they notified the court that, well, this is in compliance, you don't have to have this hearing. So this issue is, even though it was scheduled numerous times, this hearing has never been able to be in front of a judge. So I guess what my question is a guy that gets a paycheck from the township and his job is to drive around and inspect things, does he have the authority to completely veto what the zoning board has ruled on? So, that's kind of my basic issue. But the other thing about this too is this has been going on for a year and a half. And in fact, I went up to talk to, again, the building department last week, and I was trying to inquire, why was this dismissed? Why are they saying this is compliance? And the answer I got was, I'm not going to talk to you about this. I'm tired of talking about it. Go talk to Ken, was the way it was. And Ken and I then had a nice discussion about it. But this really should be so simple. If this guy wants to have a fence, he had a fence. I think you can see part of it in the photo there. He had a fence that extended out to the seawall, and it was complying. It wasn't very attractive, but it was complying, and I never complained about it. He says he has to have that fence because my dog goes over there, and in his letter, he talks about how the dog goes over there all the time and does his business. It's a total lie. The dog has never gone over there, and if the dog ever did, my wife would be over there first thing cleaning up after it. And he also was critical of my wife because during a high water, high wind event, when the fence, which wasn't properly secured, got knocked down, he was critical of her for not jumping in the lake to try and save his piece of fence. So, I mean, it's kind of a ridiculous situation. I'll kind of wrap it up. You know what I'm saying here. This has been ruled to be compliant because of this little addendum that the building department has added to the ordinances. I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's right. I don't think that person should have authority to do it. I don't know exactly what the process is for how these things get approved or unapproved. But we've had a lot of problems with this next door neighbor, and I realize it's not your guys' job to try and make amends between neighbors that don't get along, but we have had to have the police come out twice by direct threats he's made to us. He's told us if the dog ever goes on his property, it'll be shot, which I checked with the officer that was out just 2 weeks ago, and he tells me that's a crime. So I'm just looking again for this not to be buried. I think it should wind up being in front of a judge, and I don't think it should be dismissed because of this addendum he's added to the ordinances. Thank you. My story.
Thank you.
C. William Bardell, 26-year resident, clean cut, do-gooder boy next door, clean up, fix up, people helping people. I want to comment on that in about a second. But first, I just want to remind everyone, please check out Save Lake St. Clair on Facebook. Press follow, keep up to date on Save Lake St. Clair. Usually 2 steps forward, 1 step back or whatever. But as far as this gentleman here, I thought that they were going to put a decorative fascia brick over that cinder block because that cinder block is a low grade cinder block. There's like 8 different types of, being a tradesman for 50 years, I know there's like 8 different types of cinder blocks. That cinder block, I took a look at that a few years back, 2-3 years ago, when this debacle happened, and I said, how in the world, God's green earth, did this guy put up a crappy institutional, like you said, looks like a prison, cinder block? Not a finished cinder block, not a pressed cinder block. I don't even think those cinder blocks are allowed for walls or anything in this township. I don't even think you can use it for dumpster enclosures. There's a higher grade cinder block that they have to use. So I'm wondering why on God's green earth the maintenance or the building department didn't make this guy, saw it down to 2 foot, put a nice cap on it, and then put a fascia brick on it. a decorative fascia brick, a veneer over it. They're about a 3/4 of an inch thick, and they've got adhesives now that last for 60 years that they can adhere to that. Instead of changing the low-grade cinder block, you can put a fascia veneer over it on both sides, make it look nice, compromise. But I guess the building department doesn't have that depth to think that far, okay? Got to think a little bit, okay? Use the head a little bit. Think, okay? I know I've been complaining about a dilapidated garage. And the building official says, well, they're from Grosse Pointe. It's a rental house. No, you got a garage falling in the lake. It's been 5 years. And the building department doesn't do nothing, but everybody's got to look at it. And you guys are out at your cottage on the weekend. We live here. We fish in our backyard. We live here. We live in this township. Okay? So the building department makes the rules to fit them so they don't have to do anything. There's no reason on God's green earth why this guy didn't get a veneer over his side of that ugly wall. No reason for it. There's adhesives, you can put the veneer over it, you can pick his color, whatever. Community service and working for the residents means working for the residents. You're a public servant. You're supposed to serve. Okay? And you know this building department says, the guy lives in Grosse Pointe. Woo! They live in Grosse Pointe? Well, there's slumlords out here. Not taking care of their property. So he lives in Grosse Pointe. Still same 99.9% DNA that I got. We're all the same. Okay? Your building department's not doing their work. They drive around all day in circles. They don't do nothing. All they do is remove my C. William Bardell for trustee because I'm a Democrat. They remove all my signs. That's about what they do. My signs are next to Candace Miller's, but they don't remove her sign. I just want to clean the community up. That's all I want. You know? I don't want to build a new township hall. You know? I just want the community clean and safe. That's all I want. This is a prime example of what's going on in this township. You're either in or you're out. This guy must be out. I must be out. I got to look at a cracked, busted out wall and a gutter falling out. That's what I paid $500,000 for my house for. That's what I got to look at. Okay? Worked my whole life putting toilets in since I was 8 years old, busting my butt, working 2 jobs till I was 35, and I got to look at that crap. So that's what's going on in this township, all right? I'm sorry, I'm Lutheran. I don't go to your church. I'm not in your club. Okay? I respect you, what you do, but you gotta do a little work. It's an 8-hour workday. You gotta do a little something for your money. Take care of this gentleman. Put a veneer on that wall. Do something. Okay? So someone's a slumlord, they got a garage falling in the lake, they got cracked blocks and half garbage. Someone's got to look at that. Respect the residents, what they have to see. Okay? What do you look at when you look out your back window? What do you got to look at? Have some respect. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other public comment, we'll close the floor for public comment and move back to board comment. So there was a question posed, does an employee have the power to veto the ZBA? And the short answer is no, but a little bit of an explanation. The Planning Commission ultimately drafts our ordinances, and then they're brought to the Board of Trustees for adoption. Recently, the Planning Commission had been working on what I believe they call perfecting amendments, kind of addressing issues as they come up. In the process of that deliberation, our building official brought forward this very condition and said, I would like the ordinance to have some sort of clarification on just what is allowed or acceptable, because this issue, although it's kind of isolated in this case, from time to time, there are retaining walls, there are differences in elevation depending, especially in the waterfront, depending on when a home was built.
There was just one at ZBA for somebody to put in a deck that they had to get a
Yeah.
variance on.
So the issue was, the question was posed to the planning commission, could you, through this deliberative process, determine what is an acceptable height of some sort of obscuring structure such as a wall? The planning commission ultimately approved up to 24 inches. Those perfecting amendments are yet to come to this board, and this board is yet to adopt them. But historically, the Board of Trustees has approved the work of the Planning Commission, and it's reasonable at this time for us to believe that the 24-inch maximum height would be approved. So based on that, our legal counsel, when we have an issue, I should back up, when we have an issue with noncompliance, as was the case with this wall, we did go through that process. We were unable to determine, Mr. Condon saw it one way, maybe the residents saw it, some others saw it a different way. So as a solution, we said, let's send it to the Zoning Board of Appeals and ask them for an interpretation. Their interpretation was that the wall was not in compliance, so we began enforcement. That enforcement begins with warnings, then maybe tickets, but oftentimes, not oftentimes, but in cases when you just can't get compliance, we ultimately end up issuing court appearance tickets and then asking a judge to make some sort of a ruling that usually sticks, for lack of a better word. This went to court. The resident did remove, I believe, a course of block. I'm not exactly certain, but they did lower the wall so that it met that 24-inch requirement. They contacted our building department. The building department verified that, and then in correspondence and conversation with the attorney, the decision was made that we would no longer pursue enforcement because in a very short period of time, this wall would be in compliance. It is currently not in compliance with our ordinances, but to pursue enforcement when we're about to adopt an ordinance that would make it compliant seemed unreasonable. If, for some reason, this board doesn't adopt that ordinance, or that our ordinance might be modified during that adoption, we certainly can reopen enforcement. But at this time, pursuit of enforcement for something that will be compliant within months just didn't seem to make sense. And if we did say we're going to ultimately take a hardline stance, we probably wouldn't get a judge who would rule in our favor if it was a matter of record that we were about to pass an ordinance that said the wall was compliant. So at this time, we're no longer in pursuit. The wall's been lowered. As I've indicated to the resident, I don't think the neighbor likes it, and I certainly heard from Mr. Cook that he doesn't like it. Sometimes those are the compromises that it takes. If both parties aren't happy, sometimes that's the best answer. So the short answer, an employee does not have the power to veto the ZBA, but our building official did ask the Planning Commission for further guidance and clarification in their perfecting amendments, and they determined 24 inches was that height that could be a retaining wall or something that regardless would be non-obscuring. So.
At 24 inches, what are the materials? I know that was a public hearing, if I'm not mistaken. Wasn't Mr. Tominello at the last board meeting, at the last planning commission meeting? And what were the materials that were?
Yeah, I was just looking at that, and I don't think that's defined well. I was just rereading it, so
I thought
I
it
need
was
to
more
do.
like the material that was to the very left of this particular wall.
Yeah, I was actually trying to look for it here. I'd have to look that up and get back to you, Mr. Ogiati.
That's fine. And I, from the resident standpoint, I think from the very, very beginning, it's been going on for over a year and a half. I think everything that he's been asked to do, he's done. And I think from his situation, his frustration comes to the fact that he has not been able to get any type of, not even satisfaction, any type of resolution to what this problem is. And I think the wall's hideous personally.
Yeah, I hear you. I understand. I wouldn't say that there's been no resolution or no satisfaction. I mean, the wall's been lowered. So at some point, when we get these issues, there is a finite point that we get to where we say, okay, well, what is acceptable? Is it only 6 inches? And I'm not in a position, let me say, I shouldn't say that. Ultimately, this board will approve or adopt any ordinances adopted by the planning commission. But it is the function of the planning commission, not just in Harrison Township, but in any community, to debate those issues and come up with something that defines what is acceptable. So I recognize the resident doesn't like it, and maybe a 24-inch elevation seems reasonable to some and not to others, but ultimately, our resolution at this point regarding the building official and our attorney is based on the direction of the planning commission and the fact that if we were to try to pursue enforcement, we probably have a difficult time for a judge to say that has to change when you're about to adopt an ordinance that says that should stay. If that ordinance isn't adopted, if the ordinance is modified to address acceptable types of materials,
Yeah.
then we could pursue enforcement. But right now, that wall, as it exists, is conforming to the ordinance as it's being proposed for us to adopt.
I don't have an issue with the height of the wall at 24 inches, just like Mr. Cook said, he can see over it, that's not the point. My objection is with the materials that are being used, and I would really, really like to see, when that ordinance comes in front of us for adoption, a little bit more in-depth on the materials that are able to be used.
I would agree.
Yep.
For, history's sake, can you remind me, did they require a permit to put this wall up?
I'm not certain. I don't know that answer.
I don't believe they had a permit. I think they just put it up.
Yeah, I'm not certain.
And then they backpedaled and said, it's not really a wall.
So if it's not really a wall, then it doesn't really fall under our jurisdiction of 24, 30 inches, whatever. I mean, it's unfortunate that this gentleman keeps doing stuff, and then now that it's built, it's like, we don't want to go backwards, but.
Right, but as we all remember, we were sitting here where an entire garage was built illegally.
I
And the
know.
judge goes, I don't care. Like a judge is, and because they're busy, they're not, this doesn't rise to the level of saying, this is how I want to spend the limited judicial time I have. And, so we have to be realistic in our enforcement opportunities. I think there's deals, there's issues we can address through the planning commission. But going out and saying, we're gonna swing hammers and knock this thing down, probably is a very unlikely thing.
Yeah, the matter is not at this point, final, because we haven't really adopted an ordinance that allows for this.
Right.
So, but to waste time in court on this when we have a high likelihood of adopting an ordinance that would allow this, doesn't seem to make sense at this time. If that ordinance comes to us modified or changed in some way, and it's adopted in some different fashion, then we can pursue enforcement. Any other, go ahead. Public comment is closed.
The only, I guess, if this does come back from the planning commission.
Well, it will, we
Yeah,
will adopt it.
When it does.
When it does is better, yeah.
Looking at those blocks are 8-inch blocks. The last 5 feet has an extra 4-inch to it. So we're gonna be back talking about this again, because that, when you measure it from Mr. Cook's side, is over 24 inches. When you measure it from the other side, it's 24 inches. So it better have some teeth with whatever's coming back, because it's gonna be hard to defend this. If I measure it, it says 30 inches on my side.
Right.
So I'm just saying, I see
again,
another fight coming over this. so.
I get it, but there's a point we get to in that process where we go to that individual and say, we've interpreted this to be non-compliant, and they ignore us. We must then involve a court to do that, and this would fall in district court. If the folks in district court say, you know what, this isn't that big of a deal, certainly this, to Mr. Witt's point, this is, if it is a violation, it's less egregious than building a garage that's 6 or 8 feet too big, right?
Trust me, yep.
Right? I mean,
I
and it's
understand.
less intentional, but in the end, we spent thousands of dollars to try to get compliance, and we were unsuccessful. So the reality of ordinance enforcement is, it's dependent on others, and there's a point you get to where we can't get, there's a desire and there's a feeling that we have a hammer, if you will. The reality is we don't have.
We saw the hammer on Pine Ridge. It was rubber mallet.
That's right. There you go. So,
I hate to say it, that's
yeah.
how I look at it.
right, this is, so there are things that we can pursue. I mean, Mr. Condon made a decision on this, we reviewed it, we took it to the ZBA saw it differently. We pursued enforcement. In the meantime, Planning Commission said they're gonna look at that. But, these are the kind of moving, kind of target issues sometimes that we run into. This is not, I don't know who the person is next door. I've met Mr. Cook on several occasions prior to this and met with him since then. So this isn't a question of playing favoritism. I mean, if I had $1 for every time neighbors were in my office complaining about their neighbors, I'd be retired by now. This is a dispute. It's not an easy thing to resolve, so. So I guess, Mr. Tominello's aware of some of the concerns the board has, and.
Yep, I duly noted, and
Yeah.
actually I was just documenting them as we were talking, and I will bring them up to our planner and to the planning commission prior to the ordinance amendments coming to the board, or we may omit them if we want to have more discussion.
Yeah.
So, because there are some other ones, so I want to talk to him and get an understanding. Maybe if we need to look at this a little bit more closely, we will, and maybe we can omit it and pass the other amendments.
And just for clarity, this isn't an agenda item where we're offering deliberation. Clearly, if there was deliberation, I would want the building official, maybe the attorney here, because there would be their side of the story. I'm giving you my best summary of how we got to where we are.
Right.
But, there are different sides of the story. This is not an agenda item. We're not engaging in deliberation. But it's fair to say this is the time when folks have a chance to address the board publicly. And it does appear that Mr. Tominello's taken note of some of the concerns that the resident and the board members have. So stay tuned to see what we might be looking at when it comes time to adopt any future amended resolution. Any other discussion or board comments?
I do have a question. I see that the bike path, some of the work has been done or partially done. Looks great. And I see the machinery is still kind of just positioned out there on Metro Parkway. Are they gonna leave that there till spring, or is there still more work to be done and then they'll take it away? I just wanted to confirm that.
Yep, so I am not prepared to give an update on that path. I apologize. The short answer, they won't leave that equipment there till spring.
Okay,
That would
good.
be unacceptable.
All right, thank you.
But when it's moving or what work they might have planned, I don't have that current up-to-date thing. Sometimes it's just mobilization of equipment, hey, we're moving into this next job. Sometimes it's just, hey, we're waiting for a break in the weather to do something, but it won't stay there till spring, I can
Okay,
guarantee
cool.
that.
Thank you.
I got one comment, I guess, I would like to make about the building department. The resident mentioned they drive around, they don't do anything. I've had several calls from residents that are doing home improvements and stuff around their houses, plans, stuff like that. They talk about how quickly things are turned around and just how well it is to work with our inspectors. So I think you do an injustice by saying that about our building department, okay? I take exception to that. If you don't know and you're not calling, if you don't know, you just make a statement like that, that's irresponsible of anybody to say it, okay?
Agreed.
So, know your facts, make the phone calls, then complain. Don't complain first.
Sir, a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
All right, is there support? Support by Mrs. Rose. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Meeting adjourned. Thank you, board.
You wanna keep